Welcome to the All In Podcast, the show that explores how the top real estate entrepreneurs have gone all in on their businesses. I'm your host, David Morse, with my co-host, Joe Quattrucci, and I invite you to come along with us as we explore the stories of the most elite professionals in the game today to learn how they went all in and how you and I can do the same. So I just have to ask, are you all in? I just want to welcome everyone to another episode of the All In Podcast. And Joe, how's it going today?
It's going great, David. How are you?
Good, man. Well, I'm excited because we have an in-studio guest, and it's someone who we have the privilege of working closely with every single day. We have the great...
the one and only
Kristan Cole. Kristan, thanks for hanging with us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome.
Kristan, this podcast is just perfect timing because just last week you brought me and the entire leadership up to your home state of Alaska, and what an incredible experience that was to see not only what a beautiful state it is, but where you kind of got your roots started in real estate. So tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in Alaska, and then lead us into how you got started in real estate there in Wasilla.
Sure. So what's interesting is that most people wouldn't know, even that we're on that trip, is that we actually got on the yacht out of Whittier. Whittier is a tiny, tiny little town today. And 50 years ago, when I lived there, there was only 9 kids in the K through 12.
In the K through 12?
Yeah. So my sister and brother and I were 3 of the 9. And so we lived in Whittier then. My dad worked for the railroad and drove piling. They were building out all of the piers for the cruise boats to hook up to. But that was like in 1969. So I was in the 3rd grade.
Wow.
Yeah. Then we moved to Wasilla in 1970, lived in Wasilla, and then my parents ended up divorced and I moved to Palmer, which is where I graduated from. Most people don't know I graduated from Palmer High, but I did. And then I decided I'm the first one to ever go to college in my family. And I started in Flagstaff, Arizona at NAU. And then, of course, a boy got in the mix. And so I transferred to the University of Arizona in Tucson. Go Wildcats.
I had to get that plug in.
Exactly. And so I went to college, actually double majored in real estate and finance. And then in 1984, I know you guys are like, what year? Yeah.
Hey, we're getting there.
1984, actually, back then when you actually took your real estate exam, you had to fill it in with pencil, and then you sent it to Chicago, and you waited for 6 weeks to find out if you passed. So I got my license in May-ish of 19, I took the test in May of 84 and started my real estate career in Wasilla.
Wow. So why real estate? Why was that the route that you chose to go?
Both of my mom and my stepdad he was a developer. My mom had been in real estate a little bit. And so actually the truth is when I went to college, I went into electrical engineering because my parents said that I'd be really great in business. And that little streak in me that doesn't like to be told what to do. And so I did until I absolutely made myself so miserable. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go into business and shift, but I never even told my parents because I didn't want to hear, I told you so. So I remember taking a physics exam, and it was the worst grade I ever got in my life. I got a D, and I just thought, I am trying so hard in something I do not like. So I shifted over to business, and everything changed. So, and in Tucson, they actually had a real estate degree and a finance degree. You had to take your real estate exam in Arizona to actually get your, to pass the class. But anyway, I loved it. I just loved it. And so, yeah.
So tell us what it was like getting your career started and kind of off the ground back in Wasilla. What did your first few years in real estate look like?
It looked like spending every dime I made to put back into the business. I called it the 3 years in the trenches because it took me, my goal back then was to make $100,000. And so it took me 3 years to get there. So I just kept reinvesting into the business. And you have to remember what it was like then. There were no cell phones, no fax machines, certainly no computers. When you wrote an offer, it was through those NCR forms that you got your hands all blue with ink. and you delivered every offer and oftentimes presented it to the seller if you were representing the buyer. So it was really different. And so to get to $100,000 in 3 years, I thought, boy, is this a good country or what? So I thought it was awesome, but I worked really, really hard and mostly building the database. And I didn't even know that's what you did. I just did that because it seemed logical to me. And today, 68 to 73% of all of our business in Wasilla comes from our database.
That's one of the things I've always really admired about you and observed about you is your work ethic and how diligently you work. And I'm thinking back to that time in your life where you're just getting your career started and you weren't alone at the time, right? I mean, you had a family that you were raising simultaneously to starting and launching a business.
Right.
Tell us about that a little bit. How did you manage to kind of juggle all that?
You know, I didn't apologize for it. I came back to work pretty quickly after Christy was born, and 6 days. I know it's a little crazy, but
Pretty quick.
Yeah. But I just took her everywhere with me. So if I was showing a house, I had her on my hip, and I didn't think a thing of it. I didn't want to put her in daycare. So you know, it was just. I guess I would say one thing. My dad taught me a really hard work ethic. I mean, we're from Nebraska, and my dad just said, your name and work ethic will get you a long way. So I've just always learned to work hard. I've worked as long as I can remember. I mean, somebody asked me the other day, well, you know, give me an example. And I said, well, when I was 10, it was a sunny day, and all the kids were down at the lake swimming. And I went and got my horse and sold greeting cards door to door.
Isn't that incredible?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Door knocking at age 10
Yep.
via horse.
With a horse.
Isn't that crazy?
Man, so what was the next step then? So you're hustling, you have your daughter on your hip, you get through those first 3 years, and like where's your mind at that point? Like, because now the empire that you've built, and we'll get there soon, but like what's the next step in your business?
You have to remember there were no teams back then, zero. No. When I hired my first assistant, I actually shared it with another agent who actually ended up buying one of my franchises from me. I was a broker owner at, I owned a Remax franchise and was a broker at 24. So, and then was recruiting to the office. And then I brought another Remax franchise a few years later. And so during that time, I was not only a real estate agent, but that now I own a franchise. And so I'm having to do both. I'm selling, and at the same time, I'm leading an office full of agents and having to recruit and having to do the training. And so it was a lot, but I really didn't. I mean, to me, it just seemed like, well, if this needs done. So I was always thinking, what's the next step? What's the next step? So the next step was buying a business, buying a franchise. The next step after that was buying another one. And then in 1998, I heard a guy named Howard Britton speak at a Remax conference. And he talked about building a team. And all of a sudden I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to go hear this guy speak. I've got to go to one of his classes. And so I did. And then the following year I started building a team. And it took me, I would say by 2005, so in 5 years, we closed $55 million that year and about 365 transactions with 5 people. 3 of them were admin, me, and a buyer's agent.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
I think I went on over 500 listing appointments that year.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And I want to pick up on something you said, because the whole premise of this podcast, of course, is going all in. And here you are just a few years into real estate, and you start buying up franchises. Mm-hmm. I think, I don't want to speak for everybody. A lot of people don't even start thinking about what businesses can I buy while I'm working. They're just so focused and consumed with their own business. What do you think prompted you? What was it going through your head that said, I need to start buying up franchises?
Because I got bored really easily. I really got bored easily. And I remember then in 1986, so 2 years into my real estate career, the market started to slide. 1989, it hit rock bottom. So oil went from $100 a barrel to less than 10. And a house that I had sold my first year for $250,000, I sold for Fannie Mae 3 years later for $25,000. So that's how bad it got. So it's not. And in addition to that, I had another baby. So, during that time period in that downturn, I bought a franchise, became a broker owner. The real estate market went down the tubes. And so I immediately started thinking, well, if the real estate market's if this is happening, then I immediately started thinking about, I better be in great relationship with banks. And so I kind of started that process before anybody really knew what to do. And then I went and met with all the builders and I said, you guys probably aren't going to be building houses, but you probably can get in on doing all the repairs to the houses that the banks get back. So I really started creating a program before it really was necessary. So then when the foreclosures, like people were just coming into the bank and just turning in their keys and it was awful. But I had prepared for it. I kind of thought through it like, okay, if this is happening now, what's going to happen back here? And then I worked it backwards and thought, okay, what do I need to do now? So the one thing I knew I needed to do was stash a lot of cash, because when you're running a foreclosure business, meaning you're doing all the repairs, you need about $100,000 to be, and you're going to roll that money. You're not getting that money back until the foreclosures go away. So you have to have that money to be able to use in order to make repairs and wait 60 to 90 days for you to get reimbursed and all that. So it was all of that. And then during that same time that the market went down, I had another baby. And so it was a lot.
Well, one of the things that I picked up on that, as you're talking, and it's one of the things that I appreciate most about being in business with you, is I've seen how you have incredible foresight. You have this incredible intuitive approach to thinking way ahead and working it backwards. And I mean, early on in your career, it seems like that benefited you. Where did that come from? The foresight piece.
I don't know. I talked to my parents about it. And I was kind of a loner as a kid. I know that, and now that I think about it, it seems completely normal. I didn't know what a high D was at the time, and I didn't understand why I wasn't very social. Even in school, I mean, yes, I was captain of the cheerleading team and all of that, but I graduated number 3 in my class. So, I've always been a learner, constant learner. And I wanted to be involved in things, but my range of friends was, I had a few friends that the relationship went deep. But I wasn't somebody that had tons and tons and tons of friends. Like, I didn't think it was a big deal to get on a plane and go to college and get there and not having a place to stay yet. I didn't think that was a big deal. I'll get off in my mind, I'll get off the plane, I'll find a place, right? So I don't know. I didn't have a lot of fear. And I would also say, when my parents divorced when I was 12, my brother and I were homeless for a while. And I think that really kind of also sets your mindset. Like, you realize that you never want to be in that position again. So you're always pushing towards making sure that that doesn't happen and that you're secure. I think that's probably part of it. So, it's, I don't really know where it came from. I can tell you this. I can look back till when I was very young, and I can see now that I understand behavior, I can see that I've kind of been this way my whole life.
All right, so you've brought us up to 2005.
Mm-hmm.
You've started your team. You've got you and a buyer agent,
Mm-hmm.
a few admin.
Mm-hmm.
You're closing 365 deals a year. That's an average of 1 a day,
Mm-hmm.
all year round.
In a tiny town.
Right.
So bring us through the next 5 to 10 years before you really get into expansion.
So I got exposed to Gary Keller, and he invited me to Austin to come to something, and he said he would pay my way. And so I went down there, and I was the only one in the room that wasn't a Keller Williams agent. And I got a coaching call with him, and I said, A, I'm bored out of my mind, and B, I want to grow. But when you already have 365 transactions of the 1,200 being done, there's a point of diminishing returns when you're trying to spend money in order to make money. And he said, well, you're probably not going to do it there. And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, you're going to need to look to new pools of opportunity. So he said Anchorage would be the next logical step, because the average sales price was $100,000 more. The average days on the market were less. And I had already organically marched into Anchorage, so to speak. So we were already getting lots of calls, but nobody wanted to drive to Anchorage. It's only 45 minutes. That's nothing it's nothing in most towns, right? And so I went about came to Keller Williams. But let me back up a second. The other thing I think is important to remember is in 1989, in terms of setting money aside to make sure I could run the foreclosure division of my business, I also started looking for properties to buy. And so I bought a lot of property during that downturn. And so a lot of multifamily, I bought a commercial building, a big commercial building. So I started buying a lot of property. And then, and back then I was, I did all the property management. It was crazy. Today, I still own lots of real estate, but I don't do any property management. I've hired somebody to do that. But back when you're first getting started, you realize that your sweat equity means something. So I was willing to do the work. So, I was kind of working all the time, but just in different pieces of the business. And I also took my kids with me. My kids back when you actually had to label a postcard, I paid them so much to put labels on postcards, and, they would go with me and clean up an apartment where somebody left in the middle of the night. I mean, so they worked hard too, and they learned a good work ethic also, I think, from that all. So to fast forward, then we get up to 2009, 10, when I met Gary in 2008, and then actually moved to Keller Williams in 2009. And at the time had no plans to move to Keller Williams whatsoever. This guy named Cody Gibson kept bugging me to death. And I said, no, I'm not having coffee with you. I do not need you to buy my lunch. Quit bugging me, basically. For 3 years, I told him that. And he then, I think, got pretty smart, and he figured out what was important to me, which at the time I was running a lot. And so he stopped by the office and said, hey, I have this book I think you might want to read. And the rest is kind of history. That was the way he found his way into my world to actually have a conversation with me.
Let me just touch on two things I picked up in the last, so many nuggets of gold there. I'm going to take it way back to when you first started, and you mentioned how Gary Keller actually flew you, expenses paid, to go meet with him in Austin.
Right.
And I remember listening to his Think Like a CEO podcast, and he talks about that idea of he as a business owner could choose to travel all around the country meeting people, or he could choose to fly those people to him. And what a clever approach from a business perspective. And I just think it's so cool that you're one of the people that he specifically picked out and said, I need to be in business with this woman, to the extent that I'm going to fly her to my city and treat her to a nice little getaway so that I can get in a relationship with her. And then moving that same idea of relationship into what you just said about Cody Gibson.
Right.
He finally got smart after 3 years, figured out what was important to you, and approached you from a perspective that you could appreciate.
Right.
Which I think is just such a valuable lesson for all of our listeners to hear. When you're building relationships, it's not about you. It's about the other person and figuring out a way that you can connect with them on their level.
Right.
By the way, happy birthday, Cody. It's Cody's 40th birthday today.
Oh, well, happy birthday.
40.
That's
Cody
a big one.
Gibson.
Yeah.
That is a big one.
Excellent.
Yeah. So bring us into the next iteration.
I remembered emailing Gary even after I came to Keller Williams, and I just told him how bored I was. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I have no idea. I'm just bored. And he said, well, why don't you come to Austin? There's this behavioral assessment I'd like for you to take, and then I'd like you to meet with our leadership team. And I said, okay. And that was back then, the AVA. And so I came and took the AVA. Mark Willis was actually the one that validated it for me. And we spent 6 hours, in that process, which was like a lot of time, right? And I learned so much about my own behavior that, when you see it unfold, you're like, it's such a cool thing. When people say that's such a value piece for people, it is massive, because I finally, for the first time in my life, understood. I knew the DISC, but this was different. This was a lot deeper, and it allowed me to see why I was and why I behaved sometimes the way that I did. And it's not an excuse to not look at the world maybe differently, but it does help you understand why you respond and act the way you do. Yeah, why you're wired a certain way. So I understand today a lot better. Like, you just have to realize you've been there, Joe. Alaska is very different than the lower 48. And so coming from, I didn't have a lot of people influencing me. So, I got to what most people would think, 7th level team, however, there was no one influencing me on a regular basis. And so you don't know what you don't know. So I thought that process was really interesting. And then Mark Willis offered me the job to be the regional director of the Southwest region here Arizona, for Arizona, Nevada.
And so let me just pause real quick, because what you're describing, Kristan, that Mark Willis brought you through this behavioral assessment where you were able to self-discover a lot of your own behavioral patterns, that's what we now call the career visioning process.
Correct.
And that's actually a class that you teach to
Yes.
other real estate leaders.
Yeah.
So if you're listening in, you're thinking, well, how do I learn about this process? And whether it's going through it for yourself as an individual or bringing the people that you lead through it, check out career visioning, whether it's with Kristan or any of the other instructors.
Yeah, absolutely. What I also found fascinating is I've learned this also about myself, and during this process, is that I like to do things that no one else has ever done. I've learned that about myself. So Mark Willis says to me, well, we have several regions, and basically you pick which one you want. And I think he named 4. And I said, which one's doing the worst? He said, Arizona, Nevada, the Southwest region is bleeding red, meaning red numbers. And it's doing terrible, and we need someone to go in there and just turn it around. And you talk about relationships. When I first came into the region, I didn't know her. I'd only been with Keller Williams a year. But the one thing I did do is for 10 months, just go and meet with people and meet with the team leaders and meet with the OPs and pour into them. And I remember just purposely, they said, what's your vision? I said, I only have one vision for this region, and that's the word growth. So it didn't matter to me specifically all the tactical steps to get there. The only thing that mattered to me is that we grew. And also I was real purposeful about never asking them for anything for the first year. Just make deposits in them. And while you might not think this is significant, it was when they just had lost almost 500 agents that year, for me to have added 232 the following year and actually got them out of the red. It was a lot to do in 1 year.
Yeah, what I love about that is you're pragmatic to results. You said, I don't care about anything except growth.
Right.
And sometimes I think real estate professionals at any level, they have to have the next silver bullet. They have to have the strategy and all the tactics, and they want to get ready. And really, at the end of the day, you should be pragmatic about results. I don't care if what you're doing, it looks different. That's fine. If you're getting the results that you want.
Right.
If you're not, then
Right.
assess that, acknowledge it, and go find someone who is getting the results that you want and copy them.
Yeah. And you asked where some of it came from. I will tell you that I copied a lot of people. I went and found the people that were doing what I wanted to do. I should say found them. A lot of them I never met. I just went and found people who were succeeding and found out what they did. So I'd read their book, I'd listen to a CD, and I'd find out what did they do. And that helped a lot.
So what were some of the biggest lessons learned as a regional director, and then ultimately what led you back into running a real estate team?
So I think, what I've learned is it doesn't matter whether you're a regional director, whether you're the rainmaker, whether you're a team leader. The bottom line is it's learning to work with and through people, and it's also learning how much relationships matter. And I say that because sometimes people will tease me because I'll meet with somebody for 2 or 3 hours. But to me, I always want to have my name on the deposit side of the ledger. So I always want to be adding to people. And I can't tell you how many times that years later, something will happen and they'll tell me, well, it basically someone will want to do something for me. And it's a situation that you would never have fathomed could happen. I'll give you an example. Us getting into business with Smokey in the Dallas region. That was all because he and I were regional directors together, and we had marched through some difficult times, and it was the relationship that we developed then that caused him to want us as an expansion KCN to come into his region. So I guess I would say the one thing I learned is that taking the time for the relationship matters. It matters a lot. And what I find is that people are way too anxious to get what they want in the front end, meaning they're way too short-sighted. They don't think about the long term. If they would think through it a long term, yeah, you might give up some of the immediate, but you'll get a lot more in the long term. So I just think people should pay more attention and not look for the microwave immediate result, not result necessarily, but they just need to think more long term and treat the relationship that way.
Yeah. So let's talk about expansion, because your pioneer mentality and personality really plays itself out in this part of your business. first, for people who have no idea what expansion is, can you explain that, and why did you end up getting into expansion?
So a couple things. So to explain it, it's still fairly new to the real estate industry, but it's not new to business at all. It's just interesting watching a lot of different things. I say, oh, well, I love that because they run it just like expansion. So I think of it as, if you think of a hub, meaning where there's centralized resources, and centralized people mistake for geography. It doesn't have to be geographic. But if you think of a centralized resources that then provide, resources in expansion for agents that are in another location, so that they don't have to worry about the 80% anymore. You take the 80% off of them so they can do the part that matters, which is meet with buyers and sellers. So the admin, so I think leverage, admin, lead gen, all that. If you can, training, coaching, if you can take that off of them and help them get to where they want to go faster and figure out what it is that they really want, that's really what expansion is having a hub that can do that for them, for agents that could be in any location, anywhere in the country. And so when you ask, how did I end up there? I'll just tell you what Gary Keller says. I was in his mastermind, and I remember exactly where I was sitting. And he said he looked across the room and he looked at me and he said, it's her. And he said, I put us all on a break. I marched down to Mary Tennett's office and Mark Willis's office and said, I found the person to lead expansion. And the bummer is you're going to have to replace her as a regional director. But I think it's her.
Could you try?
And he, that's how he tells the story. And honestly, he called. I was at a regional directors meeting in Colorado, and he left me a message that he wanted to talk to me. And I thought, honestly, it didn't sound urgent at all. So I thought, well, I'll wait and call him when I get back from Colorado. And I called him, and he starts into talking, and he's telling me about this big vision he had, and that he's really been looking for the right leader. And I have no idea where he's going with this. And then finally he says, well, here's what it looks like. And he said, and I just need the right leader to drive it. And he goes, he used to call me kiddo, which drove me nuts. And he said, hey, kiddo, I think it sounds like you. And I didn't say anything. And then it must have been too long of a pause because he said, do I need to get someone else? I went, no. I said, I'm just thinking, I'm processing, And so that was the third week of August. And the October the 1st, we made the announcement here in the Southwest region. And then we launched expansion in February of 2014 at Family Reunion. And why I did it is I had already had an expansion team. So we started expanding in 2012 in September with an agent that we recruited to Anchorage, to expand Anchorage. And Joe met him this past week. He's still one of my expansion partners in Anchorage. So he's been with me 8 years now, Charlie.
Wow. So you basically solidify this hub, and you provide a certain level of value through that hub to keep agents in their 20%, the things that are going to produce dollars for them, right? And then you basically just take that duplicatable, it's a model, and you plant it in different cities around the country.
Well, I would say that's probably was true in the beginning. Today we know that you don't get up and decide that you want to go to a location. You get up and a leader shows up and raises their hand and you go to a location. So, and the reason I say that is because we never looked up and said, oh, we want to go to Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. But a leader showed up there. And so we got into a business with a leader there. So I think that's really important to note, is that you get up, and the reason that you're expanding is because either A, you found a talented leader that wants to expand with you, wants to get into business with you in another location, or two, you have people in your organization that want more, and it's your job to help the business grow. And so it should never be that the leader gets up and says, I'm going to go expand. But I think a lot of us did that in the beginning, and we made a lot of mistakes. So now, when people say, well, why aren't you in this state, or why aren't you in that state? It's because the leader hasn't shown up yet. This past week, there's a couple of new leaders that we're taking through the career visioning process. And we're actually starting new pillars of our business, not because I stood up and said, hey, let's start this. It's because the leader showed up. And now we're going to, map that out. So that's really how it works best. Like I was talking to one of them yesterday, and I've known this piece needed needed someone to drive it, but there's no more driver in me, meaning I am doing all I can do. And Gary says, when you do that, you go find you're missing a relationship, you go find someone. So, the leader showed up. And so I was just thinking in my head over and over, and I went, you know what, this would be perfect for her. So we talked about it yesterday, and now we're starting through the process. So there's different pieces of the business that I have known that we could do much, much more in, but we weren't going to do it until the leader showed up.
So let me ask you this, Kristan. Just give people some perspective on how big the expansion business actually is. You mentioned in Wasilla, you were able to get up to 365 transactions, and presumably that was a huge portion of your market share. Mm-hmm. By going into other regions and capturing additional market share, I mean, give us an idea of what did last year look like for the Kristan Cole Network?
We closed over $300 million in just right around 1,500 transactions.
1,500 transactions. Wow.
And our goal this year was 2,500. And while that's still our goal, it looks a little different, and COVID may have slowed it down a bit. However, our goal is still our goal. So our goal hasn't changed. For the last 5 years, our goal hasn't changed. How we're getting there has changed. We've had to pivot. And in the last 90 days, we've had to become much more tactical versus strategic. But now I feel like we have stabilized all of our people. And so now it's time for us. Well, it might not be time for everybody. It's time for us to start getting into growth mode again. So now we're thinking more strategically again.
And I just want to say, for anybody who isn't aware, I have obviously the pleasure and the honor of working with you in the Kristan Cole Network. And I think it's important for me to let everybody know what kind of initially drew me to you. And it was, number one, that you had already accomplished so much, and you had a very much a proven track record of hard work and perseverance and really kind of going all in real estate. Mm-hmm. And then number two, it was your vision for where the company was going. And I remember reading your mission, vision, values, and it said your big why, your personal big why, is to lead and influence other leaders who want to lead and influence other leaders such that they achieve what nobody else ever has.
Right.
And I thought, what an empowering statement. This is a person whose world I want to be a part of. And I think that shows up because even just a few minutes ago, you were talking about building relationships with people and making deposits into people, mm-hmm. and giving before you ever ask for anything in return.
Right.
And it's just showing up in such a powerful way such that you are able to attract talented people who can then help you fulfill the vision that you have for your business.
Absolutely, 100%. You got it. And you got it. And in addition to that, now, I've been able to, I have the honor of being the OP of two market centers, one which, David, you are the team leader in. I'm a significant owner in two more, and also now being able to be a part of, I'm a MAPS coach, I'm master faculty, and all of those things, it's so interesting because all of those things get, they all matter. They're all part of the vision for all of us to get there, for all of us to get to where we want to go. And so for me, it's always thinking about what's next, not necessarily for me, because honestly, I fulfilled a lot of my financial goals and things like that a long time ago. But now it's something a lot different. Like, I look across the table at you two, and it's like, I want to make sure that I am creating a world that you guys can get where you want to go faster. You can get there easier with less stumbles, with less, setbacks. So I'm always thinking about that. Like, all the people, our leaders that went with us to Alaska this past week, think about team integrity that joined us. They're significant, absolutely on their own. They have 6 or 7 locations, and they wanted to join our organization. So, in the beginning, you're putting all the deposits in. And then what you wake up one day and you find is that you don't have to go run and find talent anymore. They start moving towards you. And it's a lot more fun when that happens. Yeah.
And both of us actually moved 3,000 miles towards you.
Quite literally across the country.
Yeah, you guys did.
We saw something.
Yeah.
Definitely. So thinking about someone who is listening to this, maybe they have significant market share in Scottsdale. Or
mm-hmm.
Somewhere else in Arizona, across the United States, and they say expansion is an interesting idea, something that I haven't thought about. Maybe it is the best business move for me, rather than spending the dollars to try and eke out a little bit more market
right.
share in my
mm-hmm.
What is the first step? Like, what what type of questions they need to be asking. How do they get set down that path?
They need to ask themselves whether or not their hub, their foundation piece is rock solid, because it doesn't do you any good to attract all this additional business if you don't have the capacity to handle it. Because that would be trying to grow a big business with just buyer agents. We all know what happened when people did that. So it's really making sure that your foundation is solid. So what I would recommend is that they go to ESO, take that class again and again and again. We're also coming out with a class October 1st called Scale to teach you those very stair-step things of how to go about this, because we've learned so much about expansion in the last 8 years. And today, it's so much easier just because we when you're out there growing something that's never been done before, you stub your toe a lot. So I would say first of all, do everything humanly possible to get your hub rock solid, that you have great admin, that you have a great value proposition, that you're delivering world-class service. Because if you aren't doing that at the hub, you have no business expanding. If you aren't a great Starbucks, why would you go open up another one if you're mediocre? So make sure you get that right first. And then I would say start teaching classes so that you can start attracting talent into your world, inside and outside of Keller Williams. I mean, there's a lot of people outside of Keller Williams well, think about this. There's 1.2 million realtors in NAR, and only 16% of men and 11% of women made over $50,000 last year. Gross.
Wow.
And that is kind of gross.
That
It
is.
So if you think about it, and if you can provide a platform for them to go out and list and sell, and to be able to just be in relationship with people and let us handle the rest, and you could make $100,000 with very little risk, why wouldn't they want to do that? So there's a lot of people outside of Keller Williams that you can attract as well, that would love an opportunity like that. And so, if people would look at the opportunity and forget about the percentages and realize that they could make more money than they've ever made on their own, and not have to deal with the stuff they don't like to deal with. So I think that's important. And also, I say it all the time, when bad things happen, like the pandemic, it's awful. A lot of Americans have died, and it's awful. You can also look at it and always see that there's always something positive that will come out of it, but you have to look for it. And looking for it typically means you have to not only see problems, but you have to go up and go all the way through them. And you have to be in the middle of it in order to ever see opportunity. You will never see opportunity as long as you're on the sidelines. Never. You've got to be in it. And that's one thing I will say is that, everyone in our world right now is getting their unfair share, because there's a lot of people that for whatever reason aren't all in right now. And that's what we've tried to explain to our leadership is we have to be all in. And we've worked down to what is the script for this week? Now that we're out of phase 1, what's the script for phase 2? So it's that tactical, when you're going through this. As you know, David, we're opening up another market center, 4 exits away.
Right in the middle of it.
Right in the middle of a pandemic. We're so smart. So there's always opportunity. And I think rather than letting fear sideline you, instead say, you guys have just been through this so many times, and it may have had a different name, but the feel of it, and this is certainly, it's the same and yet it's different. But what I would say is that you have to think ahead, and then you have to first of all stabilize your people and your business. You have to cut all unnecessary expenses, and that means not only cutting the fat, but maybe some muscle. And then the next thing you have to do is you have to examine your systems and make sure, are they absolutely as efficient and effective as humanly possible? Streamline them. And then you've got to look at your talent and say, do we have excess capacity right now? And, fortunately, with the exception of the call center, because of the nature of what the call center is, having gone through 3 huge economic shifts, we've never had to let anyone go. So that's kind of always my last, I don't even go to that. I'm always thinking about what can we do to make sure everyone gets to stay. And so sometimes that makes, I told someone in Alaska this, and it's so true. So the car that I have in Alaska is a 2006 Lexus. Woohoo! woohoo, right? But it's like, so there's some things that I choose to not spend money on because I want to make sure I have the money for opportunities and for the right things. And I just know that there's going to be lots of opportunity, over the next couple of years. We don't know what it looks like exactly yet, but we can kind of see what might be coming. Yep. And so I would say, don't run away from problems. Run to them, run through them, and that's where you'll find the opportunity.
Huge.
I think we jump into the last segment of our show, which is our 3, 2, 1 action, 3 rapid fire questions that we ask every guest. Joe, you want to kick us off with the first one?
Let's get started. Number 1. What is the one business book that stands out to you that you've read that has made the most impact or influence on your business?
Do I have to just say one?
You just have to say one, yeah. I think we're
and I say this
I think
because
everyone asks us that.
John Maxwell would say his favorite book is the one that he's writing at the moment, right? But I just went back through Grit, and I did it because, MAPS had asked me to teach it. And so going back through it, and I just see how valuable it is. And Grit really comes down to 2 things. And one, I think a lot of people have, which is passion. So gritty people are wildly successful, and there's 2 pieces to it. One is passion, which a lot of people have. Not a lot of people have the second one, and it's perseverance. And perseverance means, are you willing to get up day after day after day after day for however long it takes to succeed and to win? And I think if you look at Swanepoel's book, where he talks about the African animals, and he talks about, are you a crocodile, or are you a wildebeest, or are you a giraffe or an elephant? I took that test and it said I was a wildebeest, which I'm so look that baby up and look at the image of her.
Next tattoo.
Right. But really it's the willingness to run hard for a long time. And so I actually have the nickname on my team. They call me Wilda. No kidding. And on my running thing it says Wilda. But I think so. Grit. It most resonates with me because I think if you're gritty, it doesn't matter if somebody else is more talented, and she makes that very clear. That talent can almost be a roadblock for you because you're relying on it. With grit, and you don't have that. She says she can take someone less talented with a lesser upbringing, lesser education, and she can prove that they can be more successful as long as they're gritty. And the difficult piece is the perseverance. And so somebody asked her one time, well, when do you know when to quit? Like, are there some things that you shouldn't persevere on? And she said, persevere on the things that are getting you to your ultimate goal, your ultimate big why. Those are the things you persevere on. And you might be passionate on this over here. So people ask me all the time, how can you evaluate all the opportunities that come in front of you today? Here's how I evaluate it. I don't care how much money is involved. The question is, are they getting me to my ultimate big why goal? And if they are, I'm all in. If they're not, I don't care how much money is involved, I'll pass. So it's to me, it's always about getting towards that bigger why.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think the perseverance piece of grit is so timely because, at the time of this recording, we are months into this pandemic, and you can see. I talk to agents every day inside our company and outside our company, and people are exhausted. They're
right.
tired. And the ones who are coming out ahead are the ones who can persevere, who can put their head down day after day and keep moving. Don't go on the sidelines, which we already talked about.
Right. And it's almost like you have to say, it does not matter how I feel. It doesn't. I'm going to get up tomorrow and I'm going to start again.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very difficult to convey that to people if you aren't a leader that leads like that. Because it's one thing to say it, but to get up day after day, and then we're coming out of phase 1. Oh nope, we're going back. It's exhausting because people don't see the end in it. There may not be an end, but we will learn how we pivot through this, and it may be that we have to learn to pivot like that for the rest of our lives. I don't know. So. But I understand how scary that can be and how that can, be emotional for people. And one thing I would say is, to take your unfair share, you almost have to I call it block and tackle. You almost have to just block and tackle to keep those things, those distractions away from you, that fear out of your mind, and so that you can get up every day and just keep moving forward. Just keep moving forward. And I know you said only one book, but the second one is
she gets it. Look at her, just get it in there.
Is John Maxwell's A Leader's Greatest Return, and that one is a phenomenal book too. He just came out with it this year.
And it is a great book, and I have a signed copy of that.
And Kristan, as I was skimming through that book, did I see your name in there on a particular page?
Well, maybe this was my favorite book because John actually quoted me in his book, so it was an honor to be in that book. A Leader's Greatest Return. I mean, my gosh,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, number two.
All
right, we just made that first one not so rapid fire.
Right.
It was good. I think we're probably gonna have to do another episode at some point. But number two. Who is the one business leader who has had the biggest impact on your business?
So the one that has had the biggest impact on my business, bar none, is Gary Keller. There's no question. He's taught me how to think differently, how to not box myself in, instead of can you, he's taught me how can I. Like, figure it out. There is a way. And he's just taught me how to do so many things. It doesn't matter. He's taught me so much. And then from a spiritual side and a giving and a servant leadership side, definitely John Maxwell. Yeah.
Love it. Third and final question, the most important question for all of our listeners out there, Kristan. This is the All In Podcast. So what is one action, one activity that our listeners can go take right now today to move the needle forward in their business?
Is consistently boring, having a consistently boring routine. And that takes a ton of discipline to do that. And because I think most people, they can do it for a while, but if you understand that if you'll do those things that nobody wants to do and do them daily, that's the difference between wildly average and wildly successful. And so I am very, very habitual about what I do and when I do it and what time I do it. I'll give you an example that I don't think most people would think about. There are things that I have to really be on my game. I have to really have a lot of thinking power. And so I do those things in the morning when I'm fresh and I can absolutely think. Everyone at this table knows that by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, do not ask me anything, super.
That's why all our calls are in the morning.
Exactly. So knowing that about myself, I do stuff in the early evening that does not require brain power. Laundry, getting ready for the next day, all the stuff that still has to be done, but it doesn't require me to have to think. And so I don't waste my good thinking hours on stuff like washing the dishes or things that just don't matter. I save those for the time in the day when I'm spent and I have zero left and I cannot contribute one more thing. And so I think organizing your day when you have the most energy and taking on the most important things, thinking time, people don't have enough thinking time. So I think I'm very habitual about what I do, how I do it. I'm also very, very focused. If you ask anybody in my world, it's very difficult to get me off of something once I'm on it. So I'm not a multitasker. I am absolutely somebody that knows a lot of things need to be done, but when I work on something, I work on it, and expansion is my it. And I say that because I'm driving expansion. I'm driving KC in expansion. Yes, I have a lot of people helping me, but my money is involved in a lot of other things, but I'm not driving them. So yes, I'm an OP. Yes, I own a title company. Yes, I own property, but there are drivers like you, David, driving those pieces. My money's involved, and yes, I might set vision, but I'm not driving them. You cannot drive more than one thing well. And that Gary Keller did teach me that.
I love that. Consistently boring routine will be the difference between wildly average and wildly successful. That's huge. So, Kristan, where can, if our listeners want to find more about you, some of the classes you teach, anything else, where can they find you?
So if you go to growthword.com, you'll find out the classes we teach, the events we do, the consulting we do, the products we own. Everything is at growthword.com.
Growthword.com. We'll link that up in the show notes. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much. And I think that's it. We out?
We're out.
All right.
Thank you very much, Kristan.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the All In Podcast. Make sure that you check out all the show notes at aipodcast.co. Have a good one.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of the All In Podcast. We want to invite you to find all of today's resources from our show page at aipodcast.co. We also ask that you take just 1 minute to leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. This is how we grow and how we're able to bring you the best content each and every week. Now go play all in.